All right, and it looks like we are actually live now. Thank you so much to the people working with us through the little bit of technical delays there. We were having some issues getting Skype and OBS and YouTube to all play nice together. So we were not able to do what we originally had planned, which was to try to get kind of a single overlay, a little bit more going up. But we're actually live now, so we're good. So, with that in mind, welcome everybody to the Dudes of Yore. This is episode 8. We're going to be talking about player investment, what we can do as players to better ourselves in the game, and what we can do as GMs to help our players out. I, of course, am Jeff Doty from Encounter Balance, but joined as always is uh, Jeremy Lilly. And as you might be able to see in our super secret Hangouts box there, surprise, we have Chad Nick back as well, joining us once again. He was not able to make the last couple, but he is here now. So we're super excited to have him back. How you guys doing?
Dude, I'm
doing great.
Yeah.
Go for it, Chad.
I'm excited to be back. It's been a while. I know you guys have been doing it without me, and I've been watching every episode, listening to every episode. It's been great. But so happy to be back and doing this with you guys again.
Good to have you back, man. Seriously, it's been too long since I've managed to do anything, hang out, chat, play games, anything. So happy to see your face again, brother. Let's do this. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So we are talking about player investment. I think we have a couple of questions. I don't know if we want to use one of those to actually start us off, or if we just want to try to dive in at some point along the discussion trail. So what? Okay. So what do we mean by player investment? Maybe that would be like a good place to kind of kick things off. Like, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah. So for me, it's I think there's kind of this, what I would consider a misconception in a lot of tabletop games where it's, the GM is the one who does all the work, who does the preparations, who kind of makes everything ready to happen. And then the players just show up and they play the game. And there's kind of that extent to it. But I think that there's a lot that players can do between sessions, before sessions, and during sessions to kind of make sure that they're putting forth their A game. Compared to, I think, kind of that misnomer that players aren't the ones who need to do any of the prep work. I think kind of diving into maybe some of the things that we do as players to try to make sure that we're putting in our best effort, making sure that we're invested in the game world, the game concept, the other players and the other characters at the table, and to make sure that everybody is kind of fully integrated top down into everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good definition, if you will. It's certainly one of those things where I agree. There's a misconception that the DM is the one who needs to set the bar, as it were. And a lot of times the DM will, just by default. You're the one who does the most work. You're the one who spends the most time thinking about it. And when you get into actually playing, it kind of starts with you. You're the one who picks up the ball first and gets things going. So it does fall onto you as the GM quite a bit. But as a player, you can throw enough energy and investment and attention into your part of things at the table, and that it raises the bar higher. It increases the investment of everyone else, and if you keep that synergy going, then the game becomes infectious. The energy at the table becomes something that catches on, and the rest of the outside starts to melt away. And when more of that outside world, the other things you're paying attention to, your phone, what's going on outside, when all of that kind of stuff kind of melts away far enough, then your investment grows, and what you end up getting out of the game therefore also grows. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I think that's kind of a good starting point for player investment. It's just kind of, like you say, that base level. Not having your phone out at the game, making sure that if you're going to be there at the table to play the game, like the first starting off point is just to actually listen to what the other people are doing, listen to your GM, listen to what the other players are doing, actually keep yourself involved. Kind of the easiest way to like tell that somebody's not entirely into it is when they keep having to ask, like, wait, sorry, what was in that room? Who is this guy? What were we supposed to be doing? And then the more that you can kind of keep yourself in the actual moment, listen, pay attention, and react and interact with the people that's going on, I think that's kind of step one. If you're not there in the game when it's happening, then why are you even there? Um, Especially if it's going to be an online game like these sorts where people tend to be more invested, more kind of dramatic, as opposed to maybe a more casual atmosphere that some table games might have. Making sure that you're aware, especially with all the distractions that online and computers bring, it can be really important to make sure that you're paying attention and aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will tend to agree with both of you. I think it's a little different for online versus in person, because I feel like when you're in person, you're typically with like your closest friends, and there is a little bit more of a relaxed feel to it. So the player investment, if things are going kind of south, it's not as egregious sometimes, right? Because we can move on and we can get past that and get back to gaming. But online, I think you do have to have a large portion of player investment. For me, especially when I go into signing up for a campaign or even doing a one shot, like I take my time to ask the DM questions first and foremost. Like I'm going to ask them, hey, what's this setting about? And then like if you have a certain class setting, right? What is that class like? What are they specifically for? And how can I then use that DM information to strengthen my performance and like my desire to be a part of their world further? Because the more I feel invested, the more I'm going to make the other people around me invested in the setting. I feel like if you come to a game and you're given all this information by the DM originally, right? Like you're going to have a session 0, you're going to sit down and have that. Once those things are fleshed out and you kind of know the campaign a little bit, you can then go forward and say, all right, these are the things I really want to focus on because those are the things that get me excited about this campaign.
Yeah, I think, like you said, ahead of time, kind of getting with the person who's running the game, the DM or the person who created the setting or what have you, and kind of making sure that what you're creating isn't cellular, that it's not separate and made in a vacuum, and then you have to try to integrate it later on. But when you're trying to build it, use your try your best to integrate it into the setting at that point. So that way, there's already connections and establishments that you have that have weight with your character, flaws that you know the GM may be playing on, because that's going to be stuff that's going to keep you invested throughout the course of the game. Because those are little tiny things that are going to be that are going to cause a reaction out of you if you're really in your character's head, because they're so ingrained in them, and they're things that easily are already a part of the world. So the GM likely has a plan already for ways to incorporate those elements into their story. And so what you've done is you've created an opening, a tunnel that they can use the element that they were already planning on using, but now it also triggers a response directly from one of the players, which is fantastic stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a good starting point as far as like investment goes. Is what I would say as a player, do the best that you can to actually understand the setting that the GM is going to be putting you into. Uh, For example, there's a lot that will change about how I approach a game depending on if I'm playing in a Harbinger game versus if I'm playing in Lloyd's Iscloft or Chris's Legend of the Five Rings or something like that. Um, and a lot of those settings kind of have a lot of cultural nitty gritty to them. Um, so making sure that when you are kind of building up your characters and you're going into that world, the more you can try to kind of put yourself into that place, and at least you don't have to know everything about it. Um, God knows there's plenty about Legend of the Five Rings that I'm still learning as I try to play that. But keeping in touch with the GM and with people who know a lot about the setting and trying to find those little intricacies that you can play into. Um, so that way you're not having to constantly during the session either ask or like play wildly out of tone for the setting because you didn't bother to do the legwork. Um, so the more that you can kind of be aware of what you're getting into, what's the concept of the game, what setting is it going to take place in, and what can you kind of bring into that setting, and what about that setting is interesting to you, and kind of how you can play into those things, I think can make a big deal as far as putting yourself in the right space to make a good character and to play a good game.
I think a phrase that you hit on in that is definitely something that rings true. Is find something interesting about the setting for you, and make that as much of a massive pillar for your character as you can, because then you're going to be much more likely to try and hit that note as often as you can. And if it's a big part of the campaign and a big part of your character, then everybody at the table wins.
And I think even in, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. You're fine.
I think like in most settings, as long as you have any sort of degree of interest in it, there's probably going to be something about it that like really kind of stands out to you, that you can kind of connect with at kind of a very visceral level and kind of make important to you. But definitely, I think it can be just as simple as sometimes as like letting the GM know that that's something about the setting that you'd really like to see and explore. So that way they can kind of make sure that they can tailor the game to what the people actually are going to want out of the game, so that kind of everybody can see. Because the more that you can have the game reflect your interests, I think the better you'll obviously be able to do with making it interesting and fun for you and for everybody else. But they can't know to do that if you don't talk to them about it and let them know. This is something that like Jeremy's super great at with his campaigns. For the Momentum game specifically asked like, what about this setting like made you want to post interest and wanted to play in this game? And we told him, and like we've already started to see a lot of those elements kind of creep in, and it's been really interesting. And I think kind of the same has gone for games that I've played in Iscloft or L5R or whatever. The more that you can be open with the GM and with the other players of like, I love this setting because of this specific thing. I think it's really interesting. I'd love to play a character that centers around, the ninja's role in the samurai culture or the berserker in the Viking culture and these so on. Uh, and let people know that that's what's interesting to you, and kind of be able to work together with them to build those things.
Communication is key. Like I said, it's the foundation of any relationship. If you can't have good communication, it's going to falter at some point. The more open and honest that you can be, the better.
Yeah, I'll give an example, I guess, in my opinion. I've been around and I've done a couple of different campaigns and a couple of different one-shots, some with you guys even, like where you guys were leading as the DMs. And what I love about the way that every DM has approached me so far is that it's usually they'll come to me and then they'll ask, hey, what do you want to see from this setting? Right? What do you want to see? Here's what the setting is. What do you want to see from it? And then I can kind of base that, even if it's a one shot, I can kind of base that idea of I've never played this or I've never done this in this setting. I want to try this out. Like I'll give a really good example. When Lore Keepers was happening, right? When we were first developing Lore Keepers for our characters for that, I knew I wanted to play a Dragonborn, but Rob didn't really have plans to put Dragonborn in the setting originally. But because I wanted to, he was like, we're going to work it out. And we're going to find a way to do that. And now I love that setting. I love everything that like we've developed so far as characters and everything that we've done, that it made something evocative for me that like I'm going to remember that campaign. When it's done, I will remember that campaign forever. Right? Those sort of things, like I think that's the real important part for players, is to like let your DM know what you really want to see at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, hopefully the DM and you have memories that can be taken away from that game that like linger afterwards. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you guys feel on that level with player interaction? Do you guys feel, because you guys DM more than I do, so as DMs, do you guys feel that you get more joy and affirmation from when players are fully invested and then they do come to you and like have that attachment to your settings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a no-brainer that that's a yes, at least for me. It's like there's nothing more satisfying than like seeing your world kind of come to life through the players and what they add to the game. And like seeing kind of the story of that world be built through the actual gameplay, which is kind of just the approach that I take in general with my world building. Is like, set up the framework, and then, you know, let's let the actual world itself take shape from what people do with it. Um, so the more that players can bring, and I think you brought up a really good point, is that as a player, offer things into the world, obviously with GM's discretion and approval when necessary.
Right.
But if you
Like,
can put things in the game that are going to like matter to you, like for your example, like you kind of got to help create that Dragonborn culture. So now
right.
when you see it in the world, it's going to feel so much more vivid to you and integrated into your entire character concept because it's something that you've helped to bring to life in the world.
Exactly. Because it was like,
Which can make a huge difference. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he could have easily been like, no, choose a different race. But it was like, nah, I think I can make this work. And that's the cool flexibility of like, just offer that question. And if you get a rejection, like, don't feel like, oh, well, obviously the DM doesn't respect me or doesn't. If you get a rejection letter and says, hey, so this is my criteria, these are kind of where I want to go, be like, okay, cool, I can see that. And now, what of the options that I have now, what would I choose to make myself feel most fulfilled, right? If there is kind of a limitation there, do it and then see what else you can bring to the table for that class or for that race or something, and then build that up. Because I find the most fascinating thing for me when I play games is building that lore, right? Like building lore on top of things. So if I can get the gist of what the DM is giving me and then expand upon it, like that's the fun part for me. Because at the end of the day, we maybe we have a plot hook that they can take to another game or something else that they can do for another time on another session. It's something really cool like that.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
making making that kind of stuff gives you ownership in the game and in the setting. It's a literal investment. It's a it's a deposit that you're making, because later you're going to be able to withdraw on that deposit. So it's worth it to at least try. If the DM says no, or that doesn't really fit, but this is what a better GM would do. It's not going to fit, but here's a compromise. Here's how I think that we can kind of get what you're after by asking this question, and still have it fit my vision for the setting or the world or this particular campaign. So it's always worth asking.
yeah, exactly. And Chris in the chat, Drop Dice, says basically the same thing. Just there is like, when it comes to adding in these details, don't be afraid to just like throw out ideas, even just to like shotgun things out there. Because, like you say, a bad GM will just say, no, that doesn't work, and then throw it out. But a good GM will take those ideas and say, well, Dragonborn is just not exactly like it just really doesn't fit with what I wanted in this game. But, maybe we can find a different race that might work, or we can kind of add in some of that draconic culture into one of the other races that might be able to make it work. And, you'll be able to find ways to kind of tie it all in together and come up to something where everybody's going to be happy with the results. But you can't get to that if you don't offer up. And I think there's kind of luckily, it doesn't happen too much with a lot of the people that I have played with, but I've seen it happen before. Well, people will play characters and then they'll like wonder why their backstory never comes up, or why they just don't really feel like they can connect with the world. And it's like, well, what have you put into the world to connect with? And they say, well, nothing. It's like, well, that's why you can't connect with it. Like you need to be the one as a player to take initiative. And I think sometimes there's this expectation that the GM is going to like put these things in your face for you, but that's just not going to be the case for the most part. It's kind of up as a player to take the initiative and say, I want this to be in the game. It's important to me that it's in the game. Let's find a way to either add it or tweak it or whatever we need to do so that we can make something happen with this, because it really matters to me. Uh, I think that goes a long way as a player, of just being able to go and say, this is what I want to see. This is what I want to happen. Can we find a way to make it work?
And not even things that would necessarily be positive. Like, you've got to put down roots in order to draw nutrients, from the story. And one of the best ways to do that is to offer vulnerabilities to the DM. Give them things that you are openly asking them to mess with. Because most DMs are looking for ways to challenge you anyways. And if you're giving them free answers to that question, like,
yeah.
I mean,
if you're gonna give the GM anything, give them a rope to hang you with.
Yeah,
and,
so
as like
perfect,
bad as it sounds to say
That's the
sometimes, like that's gonna bring you a lot more than well, and again, kind of going to like people wondering why things that they've offered aren't necessarily coming up. Like a city that you've put into the world that's just there and has no like dramatic addition to the story or anything like that. Sure, if we can find a way to add it in, we'll add it in. But if you give the GM a thing that they can put in to like cause drama to your character, to bring in narrative conflict and excitement into the story, long lost family member that you thought was dead, your wife and children that you have who are like things like that. So now when the city is under attack, it's not just like, oh, maybe we should help them, maybe we should go. It's like, no, my wife and kid are there. We need to go to that town and we need to save it because I'm not losing my family over this.
Yeah.
So like the more
Now
that
you
you
add that
can give
drama.
them, the more buttons you can give them to press, the better off. I think you like totally hit the nail on the head there, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think I'll give a
Gonna
really
give
good,
anything. Yeah, give.
yeah. I think I can give a really good example of that. Right, like Megan over at Dice on Ice is super good at this particular thing. So oftentimes when I play with her, she will send me a list of questions, and one of the first questions on that like character sheet, right, for me is personal vulnerability, right? Like some sort of personal fear or vulnerability, or what is this, right? And I would list out a list of like vulnerabilities and fears and stuff, and then those things get used in the game. So my reactions then become 10 times more potent, because not only is my character experiencing that, but I'm experiencing that because that's something that I'm legitimately fearful of. So I think that that's something you can do when you go and present it to a game. Like, don't like be afraid to challenge those insecurities and those fears, because sometimes those make for the most dramatic moments in games. Like, if you're willing to say, hey, I want to experience the plethora of emotions in games, like not just the cool heroic smash and grabs, but the whole shebang, let that happen, and then your personal investment will become much stronger, as well as the DM will learn that, okay, now I don't really have a threshold. I don't have to treat you with kid gloves. I can literally throw these experiences at you, and you won't, you know, be like, I got to walk away from the table and leave. I think that's a cool thing, is that if you're willing to give those investments will come back to you in tenfold. But I think that's a good,
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue though into one of the questions we got.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
We have two questions that I put in our little side chat here that
So
kind of tie in nicely.
it looks like Lloyd put, what if you start to lose the love for a campaign? You joined some time ago, but the campaign isn't what you envisioned, and now it feels like a drag. So how do you think that then ties into like player investment? If you as a player are starting to lose love for that setting, I guess we'll flip it on its head. How does it DM then, and how does a player like manage to come together and make that investment stronger for that particular player?
So I think that there's kind of a couple things that immediately come to mind, like a sort of checklist of sorts. I think it kind of depends on what exactly the problem is and why that love started to dwindle. So for example, if you join a campaign and it's not what you thought it was going to be, um, like that's very different from liking the campaign at first and then having it kind of fall away. But I think you kind of just need to ask a couple things of like, first, like, is this just not what I thought it was? And it's not something that appeals to me. I think that's kind of its own issue. But if you used to like the campaign, and you loved it for a while, and then it started to kind of fall away and become less interesting, um, I guess the first question that I ask is why, and it can be difficult to find out sometimes. But is it like has the game changed or have you changed? Has the game kind of drifted away from what it was supposed to be, and it's kind of changed scope from maybe it started off as this super like gritty personal character thing, and you really liked how kind of small scale it was, but it kind of suddenly transitioned, 5 sessions into this huge world shaking good versus evil plot. Obviously, those campaigns might as well be two different campaigns at that point. So I think kind of try to figure out exactly what it is, and if it's the game that's changed. But sometimes it is just your own interests that change, and maybe you joined like a Roman game because you were super into Rome, and now you're not as into Rome as you were, 3 months ago. Um, but as far as actually fixing it, I'd say the first thing is like try to remember what about it you loved in the first place. Because chances are you probably haven't changed so radically that that idea is no longer interesting to you. So if it's going to be something that you continue to play and you don't bow out of it, which I think sometimes can just be the best answer, sadly, um, then try to like find where that fire was, and see if you can respark it. Um, Start talking with the GM and the other players about the things that you like about the concept and try to kind of reinvigorate some flame into it. Um, and it also could just be that maybe they're losing their sense of investment, and that's why the game's not what you thought it was going to be because other people aren't necessarily giving it their all. So if you can kind of fan the collective flame between everybody a bit more to try to like remember what about it made everybody want to join in the first place, and I think that it can be really useful. But it's definitely a tough situation, and can be really difficult to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, again, I'll go back to communication. Like, I think that's probably the first step. You can go to the person who's running the game, and you don't have to say, "Hey, I'm not having fun anymore in your game," you know, but go and say, "Hey, I was really hoping that maybe we could hit on these kind of topics or notes or kind of experiences or encounters, or hey, I've been really kind of thinking about my character's family, and I'd like to maybe work them into what's going on somehow. I really want like an emotional scene to play through." Again, open and transparent is usually best, I have found. Um, and if you go to most people who are running a game and give them a free like scene that they don't have to try to come up with or plan. Most people will say, okay, yeah, absolutely. I've got a place where I think I can fit something like that in, and they'll be able to mold what they've already started to create, hopefully kind of in that direction, or at least try to figure out a way to incorporate that into what's going on. And it might be enough to kind of kickstart the creative juices and the enthusiasm for the campaign that you had before.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. Like I've had campaigns where I've kind of had those lulls in. Some of which that I've come out the other side of, and some of which I haven't. Um, and um, I'll actually give an example, specific one. And I hope I don't offend somebody with this. But there was actually I had moments in shoot, I forget the name of the campaign right now, but the one that you ran, Jeremy, the desert one that you ran.
Yeah.
Um,
On the rise.
On the Rise, yeah. Where like there were moments where I kind of like was like I don't really know, but the more that I kind of looked at it, the more that I realized that I was just the one that was the problem. Um, and kind of realizing that like maybe I'm not enjoying this as much because I'm not putting in the effort into what would make it actually interesting for me. Which I think sometimes you can kind of it's easy to be lazy as a player and kind of you've given the GM your front load information and well now they can do with it as they please. Um, but I think it's kind of sometimes a reminder of you always got to be putting in the effort. Every session you got to kind of go in looking, what do I want to get out of this session? What's my character going to try to do? Uh, what do I want to see? How can I interact with the other party members and build connections with them? And kind of once I kind of rededicated myself to that game, like I noticed that my enjoyment of it, surprise, surprise, went way up because I was trying to make it fun for me again. I think it can be easy to lose sight sometimes of your own input into the game and trying to like understand what you bring into the game and what you can get out of it because a lot of the times it can kind of fall on your own shoulders. And I think it's easy to start to blame other people. Like, oh, well, I just don't like that guy's character very much. Or I thought the GM was going to do this with the story and that's why it's not fun. And just kind of offload everything into the other directions. And sometimes you just got to look yourself in the mirror and say, like, no, I kind of suck on this one and I need to be better. Um, at least for me, I've had to give myself some of those looks sometimes, uh, and that can make a big difference. And I've seen changes in campaigns and my enjoyment go way, way up again, and things that I thought I had lost the love for just by trying to like it again.
Yeah, I had a scenario very similar in some of the campaigns I've been in before, where maybe my pace or the way that I play isn't the same pace that everybody else.
Thinking about your expression, Jeff, that he's going on robot for you too.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
And so if we're in certain things, like, can you hear me? Everybody good? No.
Yeah, you went.
You were like
Hold on.
totally roboting
I'll
out
drop
there for a
bandwidth real quick.
second. I heard like 3
Okay.
words
Is this
out of
better?
everything
Is this
that you
better?
just said.
It's
For now, it seems better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So, so I'll give an example though. I had a very similar situation campaigns though that went really, really bad in terms of investment, right? Where I was going on a specific pace, they were going at a different pace, and like we would have this moment where the GMs would come to me and be like, "Hey, are you having fun? Are you okay? Are you having? Are you enjoying your time?" And like for me, I was, yeah, I'm doing a good job. And then they're expressing, hey, So you need to pick up the pace for me. You need to like, I think this is the level that I'm investing. I need you to bring that of dying over here. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think what you're getting at basically.
Yeah, I'm just gonna drop that.
Okay. Cool. Try to say something, Chad.
Hey, is that better now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sounds good
cool.
to me.
Now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
For now, all right, good. I think
Yeah, it's
what
still pretty bad.
it's still pretty bad. No, okay. Let me drop out and I'll drop out. I'll come back in.
Okay.
I'll try.
So, yeah, I think
Yep.
basically kind of what Chad was getting at is, that you have to try to make sure that you are matching pace with the table, and you're not trying to, that you don't have only your enjoyment and the way you think the game needs to run at the forefront of how you're approaching the game. I think there's definitely some truth to that. You have to understand kind of what the GM is going for. And as long as you are on board with that, even if it means, making a compromise, then it's kind of your duty, your job, as being a player of that table. A lot of people, I think, view being a player in a game as something that is set up for them to then come and enjoy, and then maybe say thank you when it's all done, and then walk away from it.
Yeah.
And like that's partially correct, but I think a healthier approach is viewing it as okay, I'm a player in this game. The game's coming up. What do I need to do to help myself and everyone else get into this? What can I do? How can I help?
Yeah. I think that there's a kind of a mentality that I see across some groups, not all, and less so again with some of the people that I'm very fortunate to be able to play with. Of like, the GM is the performer and the players are the audience who sometimes get to interact. But I found it much more effective to kind of view it almost like the GM is the director and we're all like actors in the scenes that we can kind of build together, where the GM's kind of the one setting the scene, giving everybody the overview, but everybody still has to give their own performance, and kind of the show is more of a collective product for everybody by everybody rather than kind of a GM performer to player audience relationship. And some tables do have that where it's people just show up, they sit down, and the GM puts on a show, and you sometimes roll some dice. And again, if that's your thing, then that's fine. But if you're finding that that's not quite doing it for you, then I think sometimes you have to look at yourself and say, am I maybe not doing what I can? I think there's also kind of a tendency as a player, to like get yourself into negative feedback loops with games, which is something that I've caught myself doing sometimes, where you start to like notice little things that like you wish were slightly different. And instead of finding ways to enjoy the game for what it is in its own way with this group, you start to like imagine if only it could have been slightly the way that you want it instead, that maybe it would be better. Um, which is just totally unhealthy, for one, for yourself, and two, for the group, because it kind of just puts you at a distance to everything that's happening. Of like, oh well, I'm just gonna, oh well, this could be so much more fun for me if it was like this. Um, and like, at least for me, I found, especially kind of the more that I play, that there's a lot of different ways that I found that a game can be enjoyable. And just because it's not enjoyable to me in one way, that's like my normal way that I like, doesn't mean that it can't be fun in a different way entirely. And I can't find something about what this specific group and this specific play style has to offer. So sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, like, am I really giving this a fair shake? And trying to like see it for what it is. And sometimes you do, and it's just not your thing, and you can kind of bow out at that point. Um, but sometimes it could be what you want, but you won't let it be because you keep trying to make it something else.
I was just going to add that, yeah, I mean, this hobby is is a prime example of you get out what you put in. The more investment that you decide that you're going to bring to the table, the more effort that you're going to put in, it's almost a direct correlation. You will get that much enjoyment out. But if you come and you're not really you're aloof and you don't really want to invest, you're rolling your eyes all the time, you're not gonna find it very fun. But if you come and you're like, all right, I'm gonna throw everything into this. I'm gonna do everything that I can to make this as enjoyable as I can. I'm gonna look for ways to have scenes with each other people's the other people's characters. I'm going to try to find ways to interact with the NPCs and the environments that the DM's throwing out. You're going to enjoy the game that much more.
Yeah, I think this kind of actually ties into a little bit of another question that we got from Carol, which is, what do you do if you find that you're really invested in something with your character that just isn't really fitting with the campaign? So rather than not putting in the effort, you've put in the effort, you've really built this thing about your character or about the game that you really like. But the more that you kind of start to play with it, the less that you find that it's really working with the game. So you really like what you did and you've built something which is great, but it hasn't quite gelled in the way that you were hoping. What would you do with that?
You want to kick this one off?
Oh yeah, I guess I can start with that. I have had moments like that, at least initially, right, where I'm discovering my character or I'm building something up, right, and they're hard. Those are hard hurdles to kind of get over. But I think that for me, that question poses, like, all right, if something's not fitting with the campaign, but I kind of wanted that to happen. All right, well, that's not going to happen now. I have to start looking at my character as a whole, right? And I have to start saying, all right, well, if that scenario is not going to happen, what other scenario can I make or can I talk to the GM about that will still give me that same payoff, right? So maybe I can't have this battle scene. Like I want an epic battle scene where like I get to go and slay someone who's like done wrong to my family, right? Like I want that. But that's not going to happen, at least not for a long time. And maybe I'm not getting the same payoff currently. Well, now I have to find another goal. So I have to go back to my character sheet. I have to go back to like all the references and I have to say, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to get that payoff right now, but maybe we'll put that off till later. Maybe the GM will find something that we can do later down the line. Right now, what's my current thing? What's my current goal? And then I can come to the GM and say, you know what? Maybe that didn't work, but how about what if I'm at least looking to get scouts or find information about this person that I'd like to track down? Oh, okay. You know what? That is acceptable. That we can do. So now you start like searching for possible factions and thieves guilds and things like that. People who might have had it in for your family, your character's family, things like that. All those little branches will start to build. So just because maybe one thing that you have in mind for your character doesn't necessarily fit at all with the campaign, the way things are going, you just have to kind of look at it and say, all right, if that's not going to work, scratch that one off, put that in a pin off to the side, maybe for later. Right now, what can I do to kind of at least get a little taste of what that is? And if I can get there, then maybe later the GM would be like, you know what? Remember how we said we couldn't do that before? I think that now we've built something up because you've helped me build some lore that I wasn't expecting to be built. Now I can help and build that portion, that interaction that you wanted for you. And maybe that session comes down 2 or 3 sessions down the line, but now your enjoyment's even further developed because you took that time to go back and find a little niche that would keep your enjoyment going.
Yeah, and what you've done in the process is you've deepened the complexity of your initial goal. Instead of it being a simple, I wanted A, I went and got A. It's now, I wanted A, but all of these other things had to happen or happened because of my pursuit of A.
Yeah,
And therefore, it becomes so much more rewarding.
I think a lot of times, especially in this like in this day and age, I think a lot of times we become so accustomed to like video game aspects of
instant gratification.
Instant gratification. Like I want, or the game is telling me I want A. So in order to get A, I have to do B, right? And it should be an integral part together. But a lot of times we just want that achievement. We just want that trophy at the end of the rainbow, right? Like that's all we want. But in order to get that, there's a whole lot of complexity when it comes into like tabletop games and online games. You can't just say, I want this. And then like, all right, cool. Well, that session's going to be all about this then. That doesn't happen because that will break the campaign arc, right? If there's a story being told and all of a sudden you go from like being at a bar or a cantina, like, and just trying to find out information or let's take a Star Wars example, right? You're at a bar, you're trying to find passage out unnoticed, right? That can't happen. If for some reason that scene never happened or couldn't happen, then you wouldn't get the bigger payoff later. That scene has to happen. But if you want to immediately get to, the other scenes, like the more dynamic scenes automatically, I want to get to this part. You can't do that. You've got to you got to let it build up and know that even if this is a really cool idea that I want to see like right now. Okay, well, right now is not right now. I know that will eventually pay off, but I don't know as a GM how to make that pay off for you and give you that instant gratification. So let me hold on to that note. Let me file it, and then I'll come back to it.
So Carol's offered a clarification in the chat as to what exactly she was asking. She's saying it's not necessarily like an element, like a story element, but like basically like the entire character concept isn't really fitting with the game. So she gives an example of how she wanted to do something, have a character that was like focused in like herbalism and healing and stuff like that. And she wanted to try to kind of make it work, but the actual game was a module where it just didn't really fit with the whole sorcerer thing, and kind of how you can make something like that kind of amend. And what I would recommend in that situation, so there's a lot of ways to find the same sort of narrative and character motive concepts, and you can get the kind of gratification that you want for that character in more ways than just one. So for example, in that scenario where so you wanted the sorcerer to be kind of like a healer, so maybe you can't like actually have healing herbalism stuff because the game doesn't allow for that. But if you kind of look at the actual motivation for the character, which I'm guessing, for something like that, um, if you want to be a healer, you probably want to help people, and if you want herbalism, you probably want to kind of, have things that you can kind of either collect or kind of build this knowledge of and use it to help people. So so maybe you can't actually like use herbalism in the game because it doesn't quite work. But you can kind of take that further base level motivation, like I want to build up this knowledge base and use it to help people. Um, so maybe some of your spell choices, you take more like utility based spells and you use your spells rather than to heal people, maybe to defend them or to assist them in some other way. And maybe you kind of use arcane knowledge as this kind of mystic tradition instead of herbal knowledge. So kind of finding multiple ways to do the same goal. So to kind of look at like what about herbalism and healing made you connect with that character so much, and maybe you can look at like kind of the next level down of motivation and use it to build a similar path that's not identical to that one, and you can kind of help to build a goal that will work in the game that still feeds the same itch that you want to scratch with them.
Yeah, I was actually going to make a very, very similar comment of like stripping away a lot of the layers of kind of what you're trying to achieve, and really finding the kernel of whatever it is that's motivating or driving you to play this particular idea or type of character. Most of the time, it can be boiled down to something that is very easily achievable in any setting and with any mechanical write-up of character within some reason. You can typically find that little kernel down in the middle to latch onto, and then rebuild onto those kernels with whatever details are necessary to make it fit and make it appropriate.
I will always say this. I feel like as long with GM discretion, reskinning or redescribing is always going to be, like for me personally, a benefit. So for instance, if I play a sorcerer and I want, in that example, right, I want them to be a healer, or I want them to have some sort of herbalism or that nature aspect. Even if like as a sorcerer, those things like don't exist or I can't do it, I have to start thinking of how can I then reskin a spell? How can what can my character do to still give me that same feel of like a shaman or or a healer or a cleric in that sense, without necessarily having to go and take cleric class or things like that. If I don't have to, or if I don't want to because I want to play this specific class, I can still find a way to reskin and narratively tell how I want to do those things. And as long as they're okay with the GM, then don't be afraid of doing that. I think that a lot of times people are like, oh, well, mechanically I can't, it doesn't allow me to. Yeah, mechanically you're locked into X, Y, and Z. But there's nothing that says that you can't expand upon that and give like narrative flourish to say, all right, well, I can do a healing spell like this, or I can do something like that, I think that's something that everyone should be open for, is the ability for flexibility and the ability to sort of like reskin and work with your DM, work with the fellow players and say, hey, I want to be able to have this kind of a character. Even if mechanically it doesn't necessarily fit, how can I make it look like the way that I want to? And if it just means a little bit of reskinning, a little bit of work, I think it's worth putting in that effort. I really do. I think it's really worth talking it out and making those strides toward it.
Yep. And to kind of tie this into kind of back to the broader topic of like player investment, I think something that I don't see done kind of as much that I'm trying to especially kind of keep in mind lately is like as like everything about what you want as a player and what we've talked about is obviously important, but I think that you can kind of, the more you put into like what you want, what that character actually kind of wants, and what kind of their deeper motivations are, can be a great way to kind of put yourself another layer into the investment of the game as well. So kind of understanding of like um, what goals the character actually has for themselves, rather than kind of just what you want for them, which is obviously very important. But I think there's tendency, especially the more that you kind of go into like module play, or like where the GM is kind of building a story sort of play, of to kind of have your character just be a blank slate for the story that they're going to provide, where you just kind of go along with whatever events are put in. But if you can kind of find a reason for your character to be doing the things that they're doing, to kind of have a strong motivation in character as well as out of character to play that person, to see their story through, that can be a huge addition to like keeping yourself engaged in the story. If you can kind of plan out, rather than just seeing what the game wants, give your characters like strong specific goals that they can do, of like, my character wants to kick this addiction that they have, or get revenge against this person, or become this certain level of status, or things like that. And you can find out not just what they want, but kind of why they want it. Like you were saying, the sorcerer that wants to be a healer because they want to help people. Maybe they can't be a healer, but they can help people. But if you understand that that's kind of what's driving them, the need to help people, then you can kind of keep in mind why, like, keep in mind what made that character kind of strong in the story in the first place. And you can kind of give yourself a drive to pursue, and it makes it a lot easier to play that character going forwards because you know next session I want to try to do this because it'll get me closer to what they want rather than just like showing up and seeing what the GM will put forward. You can kind of drive the story yourself, and that varies to playstyles degrees depending on like how much of a railroad module versus a sandbox kind of open game it is. But the more that you can kind of take initiative as a player in and out of character, I think the better off you're going to be.
Well, and to take that same advice even to a smaller level, more of a microcosm, you can take motivations, and definitely you should have a character motivation that stretches the length of the story, or at least close to it. But you can also develop small goals and small motivations in every single scene that your character is a part of.
Yes.
And go after those goals, go after those motivations, and use that as the proper response that your character would have in a given situation. And as long as you are somewhat consistent, oh, my character always gets angry every time somebody raises their voice or whatever, then it gives you a character beat, if you will, something to constantly know. In any given situation, I know my character is going to do this if this happens. So that way, everybody else will start to learn those things, and you'll find those situations cropping up more often. And again, you're invested because you're involved in what's going on directly.
Yeah, it kind of is a way to signal in character of like, this is the sort of interactions I want my character to have with the other people in the party, and this is what would make it the most fun for me. Like if you have a character who's very kind of unsure of themselves, and a situation comes up where you can kind of put that in of like, when this happens, that's going to kind of bring up the character's anxiety a little bit of like, maybe I'll give like a specific example of, so like in Rob's vampire game that I play in, my character is like having a very difficult time kind of adapting to this new crazy vampire culture that they've suddenly been inducted into. So it's kind of been a recurring thing that, that there's pushback, that when kind of we get pushed to do something that like as a human we would never do, that I'm going to be the one who's like, whoa, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that. And, other people are going to have to push. And it's kind of like centered a lot of the interactions and developments that I've had with the other characters of like them kind of kicking me into gear of like, no, we have to be able to change. We need to be able to live in this new life. What are we supposed to do? Just, hate ourselves forever because of what we are? Like, no. And it's kind of led to some of my favorite scenes in the game of like seeing what the other characters do with that. But that's come from kind of me putting in the groundwork effort of like, well, what's kind of driving this character in this scene? And I think Jeremy, you brought up a super great point of like, in every scene, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how mundane it is, you can ask yourself, what do I want out of this scene? In character as the character and out of character as the player, and push for that. And other people, if they're doing the same thing, will push for their things, and that's going to create a very interesting harmony or a very interesting clash. And either way, it's going to resolve a lot more meaningfully than if you just kind of everybody just went with the flow without any kind of regards for goals and what they were trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, like I'll touch base on that for a minute. I love when I can do. I think doing research for your character too is really really important. And by that I mean like external research on top of stuff, right? So if you want to build a motivation, you want to build that motivation, those little intricacies. It's always hard for me session one to develop that like synergy between characters. I start seeing it maybe by session 2 or 3, and usually that's why one shots I don't always feel that synergy, and sometimes I will. Sometimes it'll kick in right then, but campaigns are the ones that tend to go a little bit more like a slow burn for me. And with those, I tend to do research beforehand. So if I know I'm going into a samurai game, or if I know I'm going into a Viking game, or something like that, I'll actually research as much as I can, not just of the setting, but of actual historical things. Because the more that I can get accurate, the more I can get for my performance, the more I can get out of the other characters around me, right? So I feel like if you invest your time and effort to go do that backlog research, it will be brought out in your performance, and therefore the other people around you, the other players, will be drawn into that, and they will see those motivations and they'll latch onto them. And by doing that, then everybody gets invested in stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the dreaded R word that you used that a lot of people won't use, research, of like sometimes if you're going to play in a setting, especially one that you're not as accustomed to, putting in a little bit of groundwork into it to make sure that you really understand it can make a huge deal. I think especially with like the language of the setting, that can be a huge game breaker. And if you're playing in um, L5R, it's not a sword, it's a katana. It's not a lord, it's a daimyo. And kind of learning kind of these different cultural things. And you can take that a lot further than just names, just kind of understanding kind of how people fit into the world. Like a great example of this in a player, I think one of the people who does it the most and the best is Caius. If either of you have ever had the good fortune of playing with him, like he's the guy who will like read books, like entire books about Rome, so that when he plays his character in the next session of Rome, he's got it all on lockdown. He's got all the terms right. He's got all the cultural understandings and intricacies right, and he can like really dive into it like deep down. And he does that for a lot of the games that he plays in. Like in Middle Earth, he'll know great Middle Earth and artifacts from long ages ago to bring up in his lore spouting and things like that. And it's the more time that you can put into understanding um, and doing the legwork to put in the research, it can pay just incredible dividends in how the game actually plays out. Yeah, as Lloyd says in the chat, Caius frequently has, Tolkien poetry ready to recite during sessions or songs to sing. And I think the more that you can do that as a player, to come absolutely prepared to understand what the game is, and what you can kind of add to it through the culture, and by doing some of the legwork to research it, like absolutely can make a huge difference. And that kind of ties into a question that we actually got from Keel, Keel Adam, a fantastic player, friend of the show. This question is, so I've taken to bringing along two games, a bag of seeds, he puts in quotes, basically a list of prompts relevant to the setting or tone of the game, which he can glance at during the session for inspiration when it's his turn to input as a player or a GM. Do you bring something similar? Um, every once in a while, I will have like specific uh, things that I'll prepare for a session, like short speeches or like song fragments or something like that to be able to work in. But I have not done what you say, Keel, in that post, but I think it's like an absolutely fantastic idea. It's something that I definitely will consider doing in the future, just to have those little things of like stories about samurai for your L5R game, or like Norse legends for your Iscloth game that you can kind of sprinkle in character, kind of bring life and knowledge and depth into the setting. I think it's absolutely a brilliant idea, and one that I'll probably steal from you.
I agree. Yeah, it's something that I don't do physically. I don't make like a physical list, but there's certainly like a realm of like acceptable actions, ways to respond, cultural examples, things like that, kind of floating in my head. I don't do as much research as Caius does, but I typically do read at least like a Wikipedia article or the DM's notes about the setting, things of that nature, to kind of sink myself in a little, so that I can feel like I'm making the right choices in situations and with characters. So Keel's idea is that's a fantastic thing to do. Similar to what you said, Jeff, I prepare things that I don't feel like I could prepare on the spot. So I wrote like a haiku for Matt's L5R game for the very, very end for my character. Um, a character that a one shot that Drake Warren ran one time that was supposed to be a Moana themed. So I wrote like a haka for my character to perform. That kind of stuff I don't feel comfortable improving on the spot. So I will bring that kind of stuff prepared to a session for sure.
Yeah, I think the only time I love that. God, there's so many good examples of having prepped stuff for the game, because I find that I do a lot of improv and I do a lot of things on the spot. And I think that it would benefit me sometimes to have some of that stuff prepared. I know that I've done a couple of things where I had some things prepared, but for me, it's always hard to know when that's supposed to happen. So I think that that's a cool thing to do, is to maybe have a discussion with your GM about that and say, hey, look, during this session, I would really like to have a moment to recite a song, because my character's a bard. I would like to be able to sing this song, especially because maybe one of our party members has fallen. Or, hey, Chad, you're gonna be giving a speech next session. So could you please have a speech prepared that will embolden your troops, or things like that? And then like it's all a matter of what you went back to and said, Jeremy, which is communication, right? If the GM knows that something's coming up, maybe they give that to you and say, hey, I know you don't usually do this, but could you have something prepared? Because this is a really important scene, and I want to make sure that like you have something ready. Okay, cool. Or maybe I want this to be an important scene, and so I take the time to make that little notation or a little thing and say, hey, bring that to the GM and see if that's acceptable to bring. Say, hey, I don't know if this means a lot to you, but I want to bring X, Y, and Z to the table. If you'd be cool with that, can we perform that in the next session? And 9 out of 10 times I've been said, like, they say yes, 9 out of 10 times, because you'll find that people are much more accommodating if you bring this really cool thing that you can add to that player investment and that character payoff. They will love that. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna steal all these ideas though. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a point about improvising that definitely kind of hits with me, is that like I'm very, very comfortable improvising. And I think that in general, obviously that's going to be a very good thing in tabletop games, because a lot of it is improvisation and kind of going with the flow. But I think it's easy to like fall back on improv as kind of a crutch from what could be greater things if you actually took the time to prepare them, which I think kind of ties into Keel's whole idea of kind of bringing these little things that you can work off of in advance. Because maybe you could improv your way through a scene just as well, but like you say, Jeremy, if you have a chance to have an awesome haiku that you could say, obviously, there's going to be points where improv probably isn't enough unless you're a master improvisational, person in that specific field. Like even like I'm very comfortable improvising music like instrumentally, but I could not improv like a speech in the way that I could if I wrote it out, or I couldn't like improv a poem. So kind of like knowing where to use your improv, but not letting improv be the thing that holds you back, because you don't have to put in the effort, because you could float through it on improv if you need to. But if you could just prep even just those little bit of things, that one poem, that one song, that one speech, that can like hugely elevate the game, then putting in that little bit of extra effort, I think, can be a game changer. It's something that definitely I need to keep in mind, because I definitely fall back on improv, usually for good, but sometimes for worse, where I could have done something more if only I put in the time.
I think it's an essential tool to develop to understand your strengths and weaknesses as a player. just the same as being a GM. Like, you need to understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. And what you're not good at, you need to find tools to help you either be better at or to support you. And don't be afraid to use them, even if there's something that someone else tells you you don't need. If you find that you need it, then use it. And don't be apologetic about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have a couple more questions here. I think we should probably start getting to those and then look at probably wrapping up for this time. But we have 3 more pre-written questions here that we got. So we have one here from Karen, friend of the show as well. From the GM's perspective, what sort of preparations can the player do to help increase your enjoyment as a GM, to make your role as a GM easier? We're kind of flipping the script. What as a GM do you want to see your players bring, that they might not otherwise bring if you don't tell them to make your enjoyment and your skill as a GM be better rather than just wanting it for their own investment's sake?
So for me, asking me questions, wanting to know more, latching on to the things that I've given either in the pregame chat or may have mentioned during a session, and finding ways to develop connections to those things, to find a reason to utilize them more, or to attach your character to them. It's fine if you hear about a specific cult in a game and you know that they're supposed to be antagonistic. Okay, that's cool. But if you then say as a player, hey, you mentioned this cult, and I know they're supposed to be kind of bad guys. I was thinking maybe that blank, my character somehow blank, and therefore that now means something to me. That's not just some random ass occult. Now that cult has a direct link to my character, and I know that whenever they're brought up in the future, I have a way to immediately generate emotional response and investment in a scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you. For me personally, I love it as a GM when players come prepared with their own goals, especially for a campaign where there's kind of a certain moment that I think a lot of campaigns have that can always be slightly frustrating as a GM, where you say, "What do you want to do?" and everyone just kind of like twiddles their thumbs, and doesn't know. Um, and I think the more that you can, as a GM, the more that the players can bring to the table to have their own conflicts that they can bring, their own personal conflicts that they can inject into the story, where it's not just the events that I put forward and then their reaction, but to have them put forward, I want to do this. This is what I want to do next session. Here's my plan. Here's how I'm going to do it. And it matters to me because of this character trait, this motivational drive, this backstory element. And I'm going to present that into the game, or find ways to push at another character to kind of bring some either tension or camaraderie between the two characters. And the more that, as a GM, that the players are the ones driving rather than as the GM having to like drag them along with your story, the more that they can be the ones pushing the story forwards through their own accord and through their own motivations and drives. For me, that's like prime GM moments, because as Lloyd said in the chat, popcorn GMing is the term where you can just kind of, as a GM, sit and see what the players are going to bring to you to unfold rather than having to constantly drive and interject. So the more that the players can be the ones pushing rather than the GM pulling, I think for me as a GM is what really drives it for me.
Yeah. For me, I don't like I said, I don't do a lot of GMing, but from what I have done, for instance, the All in the Family game that I have running, which is still running, I promise everyone there, it is still going. I just need time to do it. But when we were setting it up, I wanted to run it a little differently than Fiasco. I wanted to run it a little bit more like a traditional tabletop game. I wanted there to be some sort of dice, some sort of investment, some sort of reasons. So choices are made throughout the entirety of of that fiasco session. But initially, when everybody sat down to design it, I wanted everybody to be invested in their characters. So it was so nice to see the amount of investment that everybody brought to the table. Like, everybody had a goal in mind. Everybody had a way that they saw their character. And it was really nice for me as a GM to say, oh man, cool. That's awesome. Now, what's next? Tell me what else, how are they interconnected? How does that happen? That's a really cool point. How does this work? What's going to happen next? And then that would allow me to craft a session. And then what was really fascinating was that when we got into the session, I had a couple of things, just a few things, start off that game. And then every choice and everything that was made afterwards was entirely up to them. And it was beautiful. And again, it goes back to that popcorn GMing that Lloyd said is at a certain point during that game, I didn't have to give them anything. I just was able to just let it go. And I think I had a very interesting experience from a player's aspect recently in one of Connor's runs that he did with I want to say it's his Harbinger game. It's the Free Man's Will game, right? I loved the interaction with every one of those players because it felt organic from day one. And I loved that, like, we didn't tell each other that these interactions were going to happen or that these kind of tie-ins were going to happen, but they did. And now, like, I look at Rost and I look at Node and, like, we absolutely hate each other. But there's this underlying sense of respect, even though we absolutely can't stand each other. And that was not an intentional thing that we had set up. It just happened organically in game. And that's the kind of thing that I would look at as a GM and say, yeah, that's the money shot. Like, that's what I want out of every game, is to feel that invested and that much love went into my setting and to my moment. Even if it's just a small 3-shot, 1-shot campaign, it doesn't matter. That much love needs to be invested. And if that is, then the other players will also give that investment.
Yeah. I think we should just kind of cruise right along. We still have 2 questions left in. I think we'll just hammer those out as quick as we can, which is not super quick, but we'll do our best. So a question here from Matt, the great Matt Click, which is, what are some things a player can do outside of the game to help the GM and their fellow players? Specifically, I'm talking about online games. With the home game, you can have players help with food, music, ambience, drawing maps, things like that. In online games, those aren't really as reasonable. So what kind of jobs can you give players to either help each other out or help the GM out? What can you do as a player to help the game run more smoothly?
One of the big things that we do in my home group that I like to have happen in my online games, I don't always rely on it, but I have a player, just any player at the table, track damage on the monsters for me. It helps me streamline combat. I don't have to focus on it. And then I just periodically check in with them, via chat or whatever, what is this monster at? And it kind of helps take one of the spinning plates off of my mind. And I can focus more in other areas. Another way that I have started trying to help whenever I'm a player in a game is something that I got from, I think it was you actually, Jeff, in the Jade Horde game, is as the player opening a Word document and writing out the initiative order and then copying and pasting that into the chat occasionally so that everybody is kept abreast of where we are in the initiative order and ready their turn, which is huge for me as a GM. Have your
Yeah,
turn
that was
ready.
exactly the one that I was going to say. Have the initiative order set up So just like have the GM put in the monsters initiatives or whatever. And this is actually you stole it from me, who stole it from Lloyd and or Nico. I don't know which was the chicken and the egg in that scenario, but it's kind of passed along down the line. But I totally agree that for me, that's like if there's gonna be one thing that I say, like that's the one. Is just make it so that the GM can just like put in the enemies initiatives and then like have the player actually make a list and make sure that it's there so that everybody knows exactly who's going to go and when. And there's never like, oh, who's next? Did we skip somebody? What happened? There's always a list right there in the chat to go off of. Um, I think that could also kind of go for things outside of initiative, like if a GM asks for a die roll, that as a player you can kind of keep those things tracked in chat as well. Um, to be honest, I don't have a whole lot outside of the initiative list thing that I use. As far as like players helping with GM tasks. Um, but I definitely understand that like as the online thing, it's a little tougher to like divvy out little things to do than it would be in an in-person game. But little things like initiative can go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. Also, for me, whenever I'm running a game, having a player who, if you're broadcasting your game, who is active in the chat, who in the chat for YouTube or Twitch or whatever, who's kind of paying attention to kind of what's going on in there, just in case shit starts to hit the fan or somebody is trying to understand something and can be quickly answered. It's helpful that as a GM, you don't have to constantly be checking on that because you're constantly trying to involve, 5 different or 4, however many different players in what's going on, and not having to worry about that is always an ease of mind.
Yeah, that can be a huge one. And that's something that like as a GM that I'm really bad at when I run games. It's like it's really difficult for me to like stay engaged in the game and also keep track of chat. Like I'm so bad at it. I almost like never interact with the chat, which sucks. Because I'd love to be able to provide that engagement for the people who are willing to take their time to watch my games. But yeah, having someone who's designated to do that, I think can be really useful. That might be something to consider for me. Carol actually brings in something. This is something that I find myself doing a lot. That I just didn't even think to do, just to say. But if rules or clarifications or questions come up in the game, have a player who will Google and like copy and paste those things. Like there's been plenty of games where someone will be like, "Wait, I have how many levels of exhaustion, and it does what?" And then copy and paste the exhaustion block from the rules page, put it right in the chat. Everybody knows exactly what it is. So anytime there's situations of like, "Wait, does this spell do this?" or "I thought it was this," or "Wait, what's this condition do to me?" Um, Instead of having to wait and have the GM like actually flip through and go, if you can as a player, just go snag it super quick, copy paste it, and just say here it is. That's a huge one, which is something that I do.
Especially for yourself, like know what your spells do, know what kind of a saving throw you need to ask from the GM. Know what your DC is. Have that stuff ready. That's a huge help for me.
Any GM player help tips that haven't been covered from you, Chad? Or
no, I mean you guys are covering it pretty much. Like I don't want to overlap what you guys have already said. To me, that's all sound advice. I love it because I do the same thing. I would want to have all the things that you need, your AC, your any DCs for your spell slots. I want all those things. I want you to know those. These are things that I struggle with. Like I struggle with remembering my spells, right? Like remembering what they do and then having to go back and look at them. I struggle at that hard. So you will typically not see me play a spellcaster because when I play a spellcaster, it slows down the game. I need to get better at that. And I think that a lot of times if you take that initiative to know these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses, and you want to build a character like that, where you're like, I've never experienced that. I want to experience that.
Yeah.
Then your best bet for character and investment is to take the time to go, hey, I want to enjoy this. Help me enjoy this. Help me set this thing up. And then the GM can start you, but then it's your responsibility to do the research, to get that done, and then like have it listed out, have the basics done. I typically do like a little shorthand list if I am going to do that, where I write amount of radius, things like that, how much damage, just a really quick bam, 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 and then I can go and grab the dice I need and use them when I need them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's a lot of kind of like players helping the GM that's invisible in the game, which is stuff like you say, Chad, of like whenever I play like a person with a lot of spells, like I'll like in the little section like where I write the spell names that I have, I'll put just a little thing. It's like fireball, 8d6, 30 feet fire damage, deck save, and like that's it, and like that's gonna get me 90% of the way there. And like the more that you have to juggle different effects to like make sure that you have those on hand for yourself, so that when the GM says like, okay, what does that do? You don't have to like, wait, let me try to find it real quick.
Let me grab the
like,
3 books that I grabbed it out of, and then I'll get back
Yeah.
to you in 5 minutes.
Like I remember when I played Lloyd ran a really stupid game that he'll agree was stupid, where he ran a game for all level 18 wizards, and we were all level 18 wizards with crazy spells out the wazoo. It was a super fun game, and I loved it, but it was batshit insane, crazy. Like I had like literally like 11 or 12 tabs open of like not just my own spells that I might use and what they do, but like other people's spells that I might need to like bounce off of if they did something. So literally just kind of
That's incredible.
but it's gonna come down to like bouncing
my
things
God.
around like that to like make sure that you have it all ready so that you can, if the effect comes up and you need to know like how is this going to interact, you can just like throw it, like copy paste it right into the chat, or like have a shorthand or something that you can have ready to be prepared. Because one little mistake of like, oh shoot, let me look up what this spell does real quick. One time is fine. The second time wastes a lot of time. The third time, fourth time, fifth time, insert like slows the game down drastically. So the more that everybody individually can be on the ball of like, this is what I'm doing on my turn. Here's what the spell is. Here's the exact effect that it does, and what they need to do to stop or not stop it. It's all ready. Like even though that's not necessarily in the exact spirit of Matt's question of like helping the DM out with specific different things, that can often be like the most helpful thing of all, is to like know your own shit and have it locked down.
Yeah, I keep my book next to me when I'm playing, and at the very least on my character sheet, if I don't have a shorthand kind of breakdown of, like you said, damage dice, type of saving throw, etc., written out, then I include a page number of where to find it in here. So that way, when I'm put on the spot and I don't have the information I need, I know exactly where I need to go to find it. So that way I don't waste a lot of time flipping through the book, trying to remember where I found it. And like Chad was saying, if you're using multiple books, especially, write down, PHB, page 175, or, Xanathar's Guide, XG, page whatever.
And for the most part, we're at a stage now with the internet, especially playing online with computers, is that you can Google almost any spell or ability in the entirety of 5e, and like a wiki entry detailing the exact raw entry for that spell will come up. So it's super easy if you get caught last second, like have one spot before your initiative and you go, shoot, I forgot what this spell does. Literally just pull up a tag, Google 5e fireball, and I promise you an entry will be there that you can just click on right away and pull it up. Yeah, I think that pretty well covers a lot of that kind of stuff. So we have one last question here in the chat from Tyler Hurst, another great player. And he says, how do you help new players buy into certain styles of gameplay, especially stuff like horror? As a veteran player, for example, understands the necessity of buy-in and involvement and will go to great lengths to be a part of the story. How would you go about encouraging someone who's very new to that style to get into the right space so that they can properly invest?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'll start off because I played in a lot of different settings, and sometimes it is difficult to get invested initially. For a new player, I feel like the best thing you can do is, for one, we go back to the communication, talking with your GM, getting as many questions as you can answered by the GM. Because the more you know your setting, the more you know what you kind of want to play. Okay, that's the initial thing. If it's something that they've never played before, if it's like, oh man, I've never played a horror game, or I've never done full-on survival, or I've never done this, that, and the other, then maybe it would be pertinent for like the GM to say, you know what, maybe we can sit down for 5-10 minutes and I can run you through one encounter of what you're gonna expect. It'll just be a basic encounter. But this is what it is. If this is not your jam and you don't think that this is going to work for you, then maybe we should think it. Maybe you shouldn't. But if you're still invested and you still would like to try it, I'm willing to let you try it in the full breadth of it, you know. But know that if I'm expecting you, if you want to do this, that now as a GM, I would be expecting them to be like, oh, I'm going to bring everything to it now. Now that he's taken that time to like give me that moment of explanation, now I want to bring everything I've got to it. So I think that's a good thing to start off, is just kind of have that conversation, and then the GM kind of just give them a little example, a little taste of what to expect, and then go forward from there. Because if you're uncomfortable to begin with, you're not going to enjoy the game for the rest of the game.
Absolutely true. I think probably one of the best things that you can do as a GM, having a new player coming into a specific setting or genre, is to manage your own expectations. Like, don't expect for a new player to be able to go to bat the way a veteran player can, because then you're putting undue pressure on that player. If you're running a game that's for new players, then run the game for new players. And you need to pull yourself down a few levels, perhaps, and match pace with better with them, what they can handle, where they're comfortable going with. And again, communication, I think, is key in that as well. Just understanding and talking to what your players are expecting to get out of it, and sitting them down and saying, hey, this is the way that this kind of typically goes, and laying it all out instead of trying to keep it all behind the curtain. And when you do that, I think a lot of people will have a better ability to understand what you're wanting them to do. Because what we do role playing in these games it's not a difficult thing to do. All of us did it as children. The difficulty comes from inhibitions, what we feel are social expectations, things of that nature kind of getting in the way, embarrassment, insecurity, and being comfortable is the first step to being able to pull most of that away and just going back to the inherent nature of playing pretend. So achieving comfort is paramount, at least some level of comfort. So I think that needs to be the first goal always.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. I think it can be very just basically distilled down into two elements. One of them exactly what Jeremy just said: manage your expectations and manage their expectations. So it's really the more that you can do that and set them up for what you want, and also understanding that they probably won't be able to give it to you exactly on the first try. Once you kind of have those two things in place, I think you're kind of all set to go. And like, especially when it comes into like horror or things like that, like I think two things, like especially if you're using kind of the interest post method that a lot of people use in AppTab, which is where I get a lot of my players from, is making sure that those things are outlined beforehand. This is going to be a horror game, so if something scary comes up, you confront Cthulhu or a vampire or whatever it is that's supposed to be the element of horror. You know, maybe don't make snarky quips and try to like upstage its badassery. Maybe like just let yourself be scared, or and that can manifest itself in different ways. You can run away and cower, or you can go aggressive and like the caged animal is going to try to claw, and you can manifest that fear in different ways based on what's comfortable for you. But understanding that that's a thing that's going to set the tone, and kind of like tone words and like keywords I think can go a long way. Of like, I want the session to be really brutal and nasty, and it's going to be kind of like investigative horror, and you guys are going to be like scared of what's happening and curious of what greater forces are at work here. And like that's kind of the vibe that I want to dial into. I think that can help a lot for somebody who has no idea, and especially if it's a new setting too, kind of laying out like setting pillars is what I like to call them. Of like, here's the key to this setting. Like, honor is very important because your character is going to tie into the honor culture like this. Survival is very important. Knowing what needs to happen to like get by day to day and also maintain your honor, and those two things kind of fight sometimes, and you have to decide: do you do what's best for you, or do you do what's best for the culture? Um, and also, magic is very limited and weird and spooky, and like people aren't gonna like it. Like those three things are gonna like set the player up for a setting way better than any like specific like historical document outline. And like the more you can tell them, and I've described things this way before, and it's been very helpful for me. The more you can tell them how you want them to feel, and like the struggle that you want them to go through in the game, rather than like what specifically they need to do or don't do, the more you can get them to feel how you want them to feel, they'll naturally do the things that lend itself towards that setting. Just let them know that you want them to be able to feel scared, or you want them to be able to like struggle with honor versus survivability, things like that, and kind of break it down into those like base feelings. And then when they actually get into the game, they have kind of a heuristic that they can follow. Anytime a situation comes up and they don't know what to do, they can fall back onto that pillar and say, "This is what the game is about. Let me just do that, and I'll be good to go." And that can be as simple as it needs to be sometimes.
Well put, Jeff. Very, very well put. I think that is exactly the answer right there. Man, that's a good topic. I didn't think we were going to be able to fill that much time on player investment because, for one, the player side of things is not something that we usually tackle with a lot of these topics. So it's been really interesting to kind of toss it out there and see what comes of it.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think that in general, the player side of advice tends to be ignored more so than the GM advice, and it can be difficult sometimes to find good resources as players. Um, and it's definitely something that I've been really interested to do more of, and I would love to kind of tackle more player side issues, both with my own stuff and especially on this too. But I think at least for now that will pretty well wrap it up so far. Um, as far as just closing it out, is there anything specific that you guys have going on soon that you'd like to plug? Any upcoming things that have you excited that you want people to check out?
Yeah, so let me check my calendar, but I'm pretty sure I have a game coming up on the 17th of February. That is going to be the next Lore Keepers game, if I remember correctly. Yeah. February 17th should be on the docket. Let me take a look. Yep, Sunday the 17th. It is there. That will be, I'm really excited for that. It's the Endless Night episode. So super, super excited for that.
Yeah,
really
been on break for a while, so it's cool.
It's been on break for a while. I'm so glad to get back into doing that. I will say that my last point for the night is don't be afraid as a player. We're talking about player investment. Don't be afraid to just be absolutely weird and crazy. Okay? That's what I do. When I play games, like I go all out. I invest myself full bore into games. Most people have probably seen that. I'm not afraid to do voices. I'm not afraid to act weird and kooky. And if you let yourself be scared of, man, I'm going to embarrass myself at the table, or I'm not going to do this, that, and the other, I feel like you're losing the opportunity to make a wonderful moment and a wonderful memory for other people. So don't be afraid of what might be. If you never do it, how do you know? So just enjoy and feel that and promise you that will be rewarded in turn, because other people will be like, wow, you went and took that risk. Well, guess what? I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to do this thing. And then after a while, you all start building that up and it becomes a wonderful experience at the table.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just about to pass it over to you. What about you? What do you got going on?
Just a small ornament to hang on the end of what Chad was saying there is I think Jeff, you really hit on it earlier in oftentimes it's not someone else getting in the way of you having more fun. Oftentimes it's your own hangups. It's your own inhibitions or insecurities or issues or whatever that they are. And sometimes conquering them alone is difficult to do. And if it's something that you feel like you need help doing, then reach out and try to find help in increasing your investment in what's going on. There's nothing wrong with communicating that as well. That's saying, hey, I'm having a hard time getting into the headspace for this game. Or I know that this is supposed to be real dark and sinister, and I just need a little bit of help getting there with this character. Like there's nothing wrong with that. So as far as what I have going on, I have lots of little projects going. Help Action, I think, is next Sunday, I believe. I think is when DBJ comes on and we discuss environments in RPGs, using those in your games. So I'm really excited about that. I have a couple of one-shots coming up. And then I have the two campaigns that are ongoing on the channel, which are Whispers and Fragments, which is set in the world of Momentum, and Beneath the Banner Shadow, which is set in my homebrew world of Rothstein. So, and then I appear every week in Jacob Norman's Forge of Fury game called The Dawmbringers. That's what we're called. So yeah, stop by, check us out, give us likes, subscriptions, all that kind of stuff. I'm really, really happy, Chad, to have you back. I've missed you, man. Thank you for being able to make time to come back on the show and make this a 3 thing. I was going to say threesome, and
yeah, no, it's cool. A trio,
3-man show, a trio,
trio would be great.
3 Musketeers.
The 3 Musketeers are back again. Yep. Guys, I'm super happy to be back. I've missed you dearly, and this feels like home. It feels good. So thank you very much. I'm really excited to do another episode. Hopefully we can get another episode here quickly and bang another one out. That'd be great. I'm happy.
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know if we want to, because it is a little far off now, so I don't know if we want to announce it, but we do already have plans for the next episode in the books, so we'll kind of double check. We're not sure exactly what it's going to be about, and we'll kind of lock in the specifics, but it will not be long until the dudes return. There is one thing of my own that I would like to plug, if I can indulge myself for a little bit. I am actually going to be on Thursday. I just locked this in, so I'm pretty excited for. I'm going to be doing on my channel sit down with Tim Carney from Tabletop Terrors. I have a thing that I've been interested to talk to him about, which is basically like what we can do to like pitch our ideas and ask for feedback when it comes to presenting our stuff out into the world, posting for forums or asking friends for advice, things like that. Because I think he's kind of uniquely talented about asking people the right questions to get the feedback that he needs, and he's really good at kind of selling his stuff, and I'm going to pick his brain about how we can do better at that. So it's going to be on Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time on my channel in Counterbalance. So if that's interesting, I'll put up a post in AppTab about it as well. But that'd be cool to have some people check out as well.
Absolutely, dude. I might not be there for the live stream, but I will absolutely be watching that afterwards.
And then I also will be appearing on plenty of games throughout the week. Monday, as long as nothing crazy happens, Taylor Jeffrey, a great player in her own right, is going to be starting her own campaign setting second world that she's been working on for a while. So we're gonna have session 1 of that kicking off that I'm gonna be in, which will be a lot of fun. Tuesday, the great glorious return of Lloyd's Fourth Age Middle Earth campaign should be happening as well. So a lot of things starting off and coming back up. So feel free to check me out on either of those channels as well if you want to check out some of those things coming back. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening this week. But I think that'll do it for this episode. We had a lot of people come hang out in the chat. So thanks so much for the people who are commenting and watching. It means a lot to have you guys here. Hopefully we can figure out the tech issues so we can have our fancy updated presentation for next time. Wasn't able to get it sorted this time, unfortunately. Had some last minute tech issues. Made it easier just to come back and do this. But it'd be really cool to kind of be able to kick that off next time. But of course, to end the show, our great and glorious tradition, our improvised sign-offs. It's been a while, Chad, so you might have forgotten.
Oh God, I forgot about this. Yeah.
We make up our sign-offs to end the show with, and I think as our great returning member who's been gone, I think it's only fitting that you close us off the show with your own snazzy one-liner to finish the show off.
Wow.
Chad,
okay.
Awesome sign-off.
Okay, it's worth it. It's fine. What do I do? I haven't done this in a long time, Jeremy. I'm gonna do it for you.
For those of you who are watching us this evening, I want to say thank you very much, and all of you need to report back to the potions class in 1 hour. If you don't, 10 points will be taken from Gryffindor. Good night.